At 11:47 a.m. on September 23, 1941, Oberleutnant Hans-Ulrich Rudel rolled his Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bomber inverted 12,000 feet above Kronstadt Harbor, Gulf of Finland. Below him, the Soviet battleship Marat, 23,000 tons, 4 12-inch gun turrets, bristling with anti-aircraft weapons, sat anchored in the most heavily defended naval base in the Soviet Union. Surrounding the harbor, over 1,000 anti-aircraft guns pointed skyward. Defending fighters from 3 Soviet air regiments patrolled overhead. Intelligence estimated that approaching aircraft would face defensive fire equivalent to 50 tons of steel per minute. The Luftwaffe High Command considered the target impossible to attack successfully. Behind Rudel, 2 more Stukas followed. His squadron leader, Hauptmann Ernst Siegfried Stein, and Oberleutnant Lothar Lau. 3 aircraft against the most defended naval target on the Eastern Front. Standard Luftwaffe doctrine called for massed attacks of 30-50 aircraft against heavily defended targets. 3 aircraft attempting what 50 had failed to accomplish seemed suicidal. But Rudel had spent the previous 6 months being mocked, dismissed, and underestimated by every pilot in his wing. They called him the Old Man, despite being only 25 years old. They laughed at his clean living, his refusal to drink, his teetotaling habits in a culture where hard-partying pilots were the norm. They'd rejected him from reconnaissance units, fighter units, and initially from dive bomber units because evaluators believed he lacked the aggressive temperament required for combat flying. But in the next 90 minutes, Rudel would sink the battleship Marat, damage a cruiser, and help destroy a destroyer. 3 capital warships in a single mission. And over the next 4 years, he would fly 2,530 combat missions, destroy 519 tanks, sink 2 more cruisers, and become the most decorated German serviceman of World War II. The old man who didn't fit in, who was too cautious, too methodical, too boring for the glamorous world of Luftwaffe fighter pilots, would prove that survival and effectiveness matter more than conforming to pilot culture. This is that story. Hans-Ulrich Rudel was born on July 2, 1916 in Konradswaldau, Silesia, now part of Poland. His father was a Lutheran pastor. The family was deeply religious, conservative, and committed to physical fitness and clean living. Young Hans grew up hiking in the Silesian mountains, skiing and practicing athletics. He didn't smoke. He didn't drink. He attended church regularly. By the standards of 1930s Germany, where beer halls and taverns were central to social life, Rudel was an oddity. By the standards of Luftwaffe pilot culture, he was completely alien. In 1936, at age 20, Rudel began pilot training with the Luftwaffe. His instructors noted that he was technically proficient, but lacked the flashy, aggressive flying style that characterized successful fighter pilots. His aerobatic performance was adequate but not exceptional. His gunnery scores were average. His personality was serious, methodical, and disciplined, traits that evaluators associated with transport pilots, not combat pilots. When Rudel requested assignment to reconnaissance units, he was rejected. Lacks the temperament for combat operations. When he requested fighter training, he was rejected again. Inadequate aggressive instincts. By 1939, Rudel had been relegated to long-range reconnaissance, flying slow, unarmed aircraft on photographic missions. It was boring, unglamorous work. Other pilots from his training class were flying Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters over Poland, shooting down enemy aircraft, earning decorations and promotions. Rudel was flying reconnaissance patterns over empty countryside. His logbook recorded hundreds of hours of flight time, but 0 combat missions. He was becoming an experienced pilot without ever seeing combat. The gap between his flight hours and his combat experience created an unusual situation. By 1940, Rudel had more total flight time than many combat pilots, but 0 operational experience. He was simultaneously experienced and inexperienced, skilled and unproven. In early 1941, Rudel finally received an opportunity. The Luftwaffe was expanding its dive bomber force in preparation for Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Sturzkampfgeschwader 2, STG-2, the Immelmann wing, needed pilots. Rudel's extensive flight hours made him technically qualified. He was assigned to 1, Staffel STG-2 as a dive bomber pilot. He would fly the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka. The Stuka, by June 1941, was already considered obsolete by many Luftwaffe commanders. Maximum speed, 255 mph. Service ceiling, 23,000 feet. Armament, 2 37mm cannon firing forward, one 7.92 mm machine gun in the rear cockpit. Bomb load, one 500-kilogram, 100-pound bomb centerline, plus 2 50 bombs on wing racks. Fixed landing gear created massive drag, limiting speed and maneuverability. The aircraft was slow, ungainly, vulnerable to modern fighters, and relied on psychological effect as much as actual destructive capability. The iconic sirens, Jericho trumpets, mounted on the landing gear struts were designed to terrorize ground troops, not destroy military targets. But the Stuka had one critical advantage that Rudel's methodical personality was perfectly suited to exploit: accuracy. The Ju-87 was designed specifically for precision dive bombing. The aircraft featured automatic pull-out systems that prevented pilots from blacking out during high-G recoveries. The dive brakes allowed controlled steep dives at consistent speeds. The bomb-aiming system was calibrated for precision strikes against small targets. The Stuka wasn't fast. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the aircraft ambitious young pilots dreamed of flying, but it was the most accurate bomber in the Luftwaffe inventory. And accuracy, Rudel would prove, mattered more than speed, glamour, or pilot culture. On June 22, 1941, Operation Barbarossa began. STG-2 flew missions supporting Army Group Center's advance into Belarusia. Rudel flew his first combat mission on June 23, ground support for advancing infantry near Grodno. His second mission came that afternoon, tank attack near Bialystok. His third mission that evening, artillery position destruction near Novogrudok. 3 missions in his first day of combat. By the end of June, Rudel had flown 35 combat missions. By the end of July, 97 missions. By the end of August, 164 missions. He was flying 3 to 4 missions per day, sometimes more. Other pilots flew 1 to 2 missions per day and spent evenings drinking, socializing, celebrating their achievements. Rudel flew until dark, went to bed early, woke at dawn, and flew again. His logbook recorded mission after mission with clinical precision. Target destroyed, target damaged, target missed. No embellishment, no drama, just results. His squadron mates initially mocked his intensity. Lieutenant Werner Eichhorn said, "Rudel is like a machine. He doesn't joke, doesn't relax, doesn't celebrate victories. He just flies, lands, refuels, and flies again. It's inhuman." The Flight Sergeant Kurt Wilke commented, "The old man makes us all look bad. He doesn't drink, doesn't party, doesn't pursue women. He just works. And his mission count keeps climbing while the rest of us try to enjoy what might be our last weeks alive." The nickname Der Alte Man, the old man, stuck despite Rudel being one of the youngest pilots in the squadron. It wasn't about age, it was about temperament. Rudel seemed old because he didn't conform to the young, aggressive, hedonistic pilot culture that dominated the Luftwaffe. Can a pilot who doesn't fit in, who was rejected from fighters, who is mocked by his own squadron mates as too old and too boring, become the most successful ground attack pilot in history? Can methodical precision defeat flashy aggression? Please like this video to see how this turns out. Subscribe for more unlikely heroes, and let's continue to September 1941. By September 1941, STG-2 had been transferred north to support Army Group North's siege of Leningrad. The city was surrounded but not captured. Soviet forces were resisting fiercely. One major problem for German ground forces was naval gunfire support from the Soviet Baltic Fleet. The fleet's battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, anchored in Kronstadt Harbor on the island fortress of Kronstadt, 5 miles from Leningrad, could fire their main batteries 18 to 20 miles, dropping 12-inch shells onto German positions. The battleship Marat was particularly troublesome. Her 4 12-inch gun turrets could each fire a 1,000-pound shell every 30 seconds. When Marat opened fire, German infantry described the impact as earthquakes. Trenches collapsed, bunkers crumbled. Soldiers suffered psychological breakdown from the constant bombardment. Luftwaffe command ordered STG-2 to sink the Soviet warships. On September 16, 1941, 30 Stukas attacked Kronstadt in the worst weather conditions imaginable. Heavy clouds at 3,000 feet, rain, wind gusting to 40 mph, visibility less than 1 mile. Anti-aircraft fire from over 1,000 guns created a curtain of exploding shells that pilots described as impenetrable. Hauptmann Stein led the attack. Rudel flew as his wingman. Through gaps in the clouds, they spotted Marat anchored in open water. Stein dove first. His 500-kilogram bomb was a near miss, exploding 20 meters from Marat's port side. Rudel followed. His bomb hit Marat's aft deck, penetrating to the interior, starting fires. The battleship survived, but was damaged. Intelligence confirmed Marat had moved to Kronstadt Harbor for repairs, anchored in the most heavily defended position in the Baltic. For the next 6 days, STG-2 couldn't attack. Weather was too poor, cloud cover too low, wind too strong. On September 21st, weather improved slightly. Stein requested permission to attack Marat again. Luftwaffe command denied the request. The target is too heavily defended. Losses will be unacceptable. Wait for better weather and larger attack force. Stein waited. On September 22nd, reconnaissance reported Marat was still in Kronstadt undergoing repairs. Stein requested permission again. Denied again. Weather still inadequate. Attack force too small. But STG-2 had just received a delivery of new weapons, 1,000-kilogram, 2,200-pound armor-piercing bombs. These were twice the weight of standard bombs, with thick steel casings designed to penetrate battleship armor before detonating internally. The bombs had never been used operationally. No one knew if the Ju-87 Stuka could even carry such heavy ordnance. Loading a 2,200-pound bomb on an aircraft designed for 2,100-pound maximum load raised concerns about structural integrity, takeoff capability, and handling characteristics. Test flights would be required, but test flights took time, and Marat wouldn't wait forever in Kronstadt. She was being repaired. Soon, she'd return to open water and resume bombardment. Rudel had an idea. He approached Stein privately on the evening of September 22nd. Rudel's proposal: 3 aircraft. 3 1,000-kilogram bombs. Small formation would be difficult for Soviet anti-aircraft gunners to track. Low-altitude approach under radar coverage. Attack at dawn when anti-aircraft crews would be least alert. No test flights needed, just load the bombs and go. Stein hesitated. The proposal violated every doctrine. Small forces against heavily defended targets always resulted in high casualties. Attacking the most defended naval base in the Soviet Union with just 3 aircraft seemed suicidal. But Stein also knew that massed attacks had failed. On September 16th, 30 Stukas had achieved 2 near misses and 1 moderate hit against Marat. 30 aircraft, moderate damage. Maybe 3 aircraft with 2,200-pound armor-piercing bombs could achieve what 30 aircraft with 100-pound bombs couldn't. Stein approved the plan, but he didn't request permission from higher command. He simply briefed his pilots, himself, Rudel, and Lau. 3 aircraft, 5:00 a.m. takeoff. Destination, Kronstadt. Target, Marat. At 4:30 a.m. on September 23, 1941, Ground crew loaded three 1,000-kilogram armor-piercing bombs onto three Ju-87 Stukas. The bombs were so large they barely cleared the ground when mounted on the aircraft's centerline racks. Pilots worried the bombs would hit the runway during takeoff. The Stuka's landing gear struts compressed under the weight, giving the aircraft a nose-down attitude. Takeoff would be challenging. If the pilot rotated too early, the bomb would scrape the runway. If he rotated too late, the aircraft wouldn't achieve flying speed before running out of runway. The margin for error was measured in feet and fractions of a second. At 5:03 a.m., Steen Stuka rolled down the runway, accelerated to 90 mach, rotated carefully, and lifted off with 6 feet of runway remaining. Rudel followed at 5:04 a.m., rotated at 92 mach, cleared the runway with 8 feet remaining. Lau lifted off at 5:05 a.m. All three aircraft were airborne, carrying bombs they'd never tested, heading toward a target command had ordered them not to attack. The flight to Kronstadt took 42 minutes. The formation stayed low, 500 feet above the Gulf of Finland, to avoid Soviet radar detection. At 5:40 a.m., the sun rose behind them, providing perfect lighting conditions. Attacking from the east with the sun behind them would make the aircraft difficult for anti-aircraft gunners to spot. At 5:45 a.m., Kronstadt Harbor appeared on the horizon. The anti-aircraft fire started immediately. Soviet gunners didn't need radar. They could hear the Stuka engines. Within seconds, the sky filled with exploding 85mm, 37mm, and 25-meter shells. Steen began his approach run at 5:47 a.m., climbing to 12,000 feet. Rudel and Lau followed in trail formation, 500 feet behind and slightly to the right. At 12,000 feet, Steen rolled inverted directly above Marat. Rudel saw Steen's Stuka pull into a near-vertical dive. Dive brakes extended, engine screaming. Anti-aircraft fire concentrated on Steen's aircraft. Tracers and explosions filled the sky around him. Steen held the dive. At 3,000 feet, he released his bomb. The 2,200-pound weapon separated from the aircraft and fell toward Marat. Steen pulled out of his dive at 1,500 feet, pulling 5 G-forces, climbing away while jinking left and right to avoid flak. Rudel couldn't see where Steen's bomb landed. Smoke and spray from anti-aircraft shells obscured the target, but Rudel was already in his dive. He'd rolled inverted at 12,000 feet and pulled into a 75-degree dive angle. His rear gunner, Sergeant Alfred Charnowski, reported, "Steen's bomb was a near miss, port side maybe 15 meters." Rudel adjusted his aim slightly to the right. At 8,000 feet, traveling at 200 m/s, Rudel could see Marat clearly. Sailors were running across the deck. Gun turrets were rotating, tracking his dive. Muzzle flashes from anti-aircraft guns created a wall of fire between him and the target. At 5,000 feet, Rudel fine-tuned his dive angle. The Stuka's automatic dive system would pull the aircraft out at 1,500 feet, but Rudel wanted to go lower. He switched off the automatic system, manual pullout. He would stay in the dive until 900 feet, well below safe altitude, to ensure maximum accuracy. At 3,000 feet, Marat filled his bomb sight. The red circle on the sight's reticle centered on the forward section of the battleship, just aft of the first gun turret. Wind was negligible, no need to compensate for drift. Rudel held the dive. 2,500 feet, 2,000 feet, 2,500 feet. At 1,200 feet, traveling at 300 mph in a 75-degree dive, Rudel pressed the bomb release. The 2,200-pound armor-piercing bomb separated from the aircraft. The sudden weight loss caused the Stuka to lurch upward. Rudel immediately pulled back on the control column. 6 G-forces pressed him into his seat. His vision grayed. Blood drained from his brain. He was pulling too many Gs. He was too low. The bomb's fragmentation effect extended 3,000 feet. He'd released at 1,200 feet. He was inside the bomb's kill radius. Rudel's vision blacked out completely. He couldn't see. He was pulling out blind, relying on muscle memory and feel. His altimeter showed 500 feet, then 400 feet, then 300 feet. The Stuka was still descending in the pullout. He pulled harder. 7G forces. His vision was still black. Charnowski's voice crackled through the intercom. "She is blowing up, sir." Rudel's vision returned at 150 feet altitude. He was 10 feet above the water, traveling at 260 mph, still pulling 5G forces. Behind him, a column of smoke and fire rose 200 feet into the sky. Marat's forward magazine had exploded. The entire forward section of the battleship, from the bow to the second gun turret, had been obliterated. The bow was gone. The first gun turret had disappeared. The superstructure had collapsed. Flames reached 800 feet high. Secondary explosions continued as ammunition cooked off. Rudel climbed away, jinking to avoid anti-aircraft fire. Charnowski reported, "Direct hit, forward magazine. The ship is breaking apart." Lau had already begun his dive. His bomb hit Marat's midship section, causing additional fires but no major secondary explosions. 3 bombs, 2 direct hits, 1 near miss. Marat settled to the bottom of Kronstadt Harbor in 11 meters of water. 326 Soviet sailors were killed instantly. The battleship's back was broken. She would never sail again. Soviet engineers would later refloat parts of the hull and remount some guns as stationary batteries, but Marat, as a functional warship, was destroyed. The entire attack, from first aircraft rolling inverted to last aircraft exiting the target area, had lasted 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Rudel landed back at base at 6:47 a.m. Ground crew counted 14 anti-aircraft holes in his Stuka. One 37mm shell had passed through the left wing, missing the main spar by 8 inches. Another had punctured the fuselage just behind Charnowski's position, missing the rear gunner by 2 feet. A third had destroyed the right landing gear strut's hydraulic line. Rudel's landing gear collapsed on touchdown, and the aircraft skidded 200 feet before stopping. Rudel and Charnowski climbed out unhurt. Intelligence officers arrived minutes later with confirmation. Reconnaissance aircraft reported Marat destroyed. The battleship was broken in half, burning, and sinking. The mission was a complete success, but Rudel wasn't finished. At 11:30 a.m. that same morning, reconnaissance reported a Soviet cruiser, the Kirov-class cruiser Petropavlovsk, attempting to leave Kronstadt Harbor. The cruiser had been damaged in previous raids and was incomplete, but Soviet command was trying to evacuate her before she could be destroyed in harbor. Rudel volunteered to attack. His squadron commander refused. "You've already flown 1 mission today against the most heavily defended target on the Eastern Front. You've used up your luck. Stand down." Rudel argued. "The cruiser is trying to escape. If she reaches open water, we'll lose the opportunity. I have fuel, I have ammunition. I can fly." The squadron commander relented. At 12:15 p.m., Rudel took off in a different Stuka. His previous aircraft was too damaged to fly. He flew alone. No wingmen, no fighter escort. Solo attack on a cruiser escorted by 6 destroyers and covered by land-based anti-aircraft positions. At 12:47 p.m., Rudel spotted Petropavlovsk, 15 miles northwest of Kronstadt, steaming at 18 knots, surrounded by 6 destroyers in a protective screen. Rudel climbed to 10,000 feet, rolled inverted, and dove. The cruiser's anti-aircraft guns opened fire immediately. Rudel held his dive to 2,000 feet, higher than his Marat dive, but still well below doctrine, and released his 500-kilogram bomb. Direct hit on the cruiser's stern. The bomb penetrated the deck and exploded in the engine room. Petropavlovsk lost power and began listing. The cruiser was towed back to Kronstadt and never sailed again. At 3:30 p.m., Rudel landed back at base for the second time that day. At 4:15 p.m., reconnaissance reported a Soviet destroyer, the Leningrad-class destroyer Minsk, attempting to evacuate Kronstadt. Rudel volunteered again. This time, his squadron commander didn't even argue. "You're insane!" But you're also the only pilot who can hit these targets. Go. At 4:45 p.m., Rudel took off for his third mission of the day. At 5:22 p.m., he attacked Minsk, achieving another direct hit that disabled the destroyer's propulsion. Minsk was towed back to Kronstadt and spent the rest of the war under repair. 3 missions, 3 attacks on capital warships, 3 direct hits, 1 battleship destroyed, 1 cruiser severely damaged, 1 destroyer disabled, all in a single day. Total flight time, 6 hours 18 minutes. Total combat time, approximately 90 minutes from first attack on Marat to final attack on Minsk. Hans-Ulrich Rudel, the pilot who lacked aggressive temperament, who was too cautious for fighters, who was mocked as the old man, despite being 25 years old, had just accomplished what entire squadrons had failed to achieve. And he'd done it by ignoring pilot culture, ignoring doctrine, and relying on methodical precision rather than flashy aggression. The mockery stopped. The jokes about the old man stopped. Pilots who dismissed Rudel as boring, weird, and unsuitable for combat flying started requesting to fly as his wingman. But Rudel's personality didn't change. He still didn't drink. He still didn't party. He still went to bed early and woke at dawn. He just kept flying missions, achieving results, and proving that effectiveness matters more than conforming to culture. Rudel flew 2,530 combat missions during World War II. That number exceeds any other pilot in any air force in any war. The closest Allied equivalent was Soviet pilot Ivan Kozhedub with 330 missions. American pilot with highest mission count was Francis Gabreski with 266 missions. Rudel flew nearly 10 times more missions than the highest-scoring Allied pilots. How? Discipline, methodology, refusal to conform to pilot culture that valued relaxation and celebration over continuous operations. Understanding how Rudel achieved 2,530 missions requires understanding the Eastern Front's operational tempo and Rudel's unique approach. Between June 22, 1941 and May 8, 1945, a period of 1417 days, Rudel flew an average of 1.78 missions per day every day for nearly 4 years. But averages obscure the reality. Rudel often flew 4 to 6 missions per day during intensive operations. His record was 17 missions in a single day during the Battle of Kursk in July 1943. 17 combat missions meant approximately 14 hours in the cockpit, returning to base every 45-60 minutes to refuel, rearm, and take off again. How did he survive? Most dive bomber pilots had life expectancies measured in weeks. Stuka losses on the Eastern Front averaged 15-20% per month, meaning a pilot had a 50% chance of surviving 3 months. Rudel survived nearly 4 years flying the most dangerous missions in the most dangerous aircraft. His survival strategy was the opposite of what pilot culture advocated. Pilot culture said, fly aggressively, take risks, achieve glory. Rudel's approach, fly methodically, minimize risks, achieve objectives. When other pilots dove from 8,000 feet, Rudel dove from 12,000 feet. Higher altitude meant more time to assess anti-aircraft fire and adjust attack angle. When other pilots pulled out at 2,000 feet, Rudel pulled out at 1,500 feet or lower. Lower pullout meant better accuracy and shorter time exposed to ground fire. When other pilots released bombs and immediately turned away, Rudel held his dive longer, ensured his bomb was on target, then executed a coordinated escape maneuver. The Junkers Ju-87 Stuka that Rudel flew deserves detailed examination because understanding the aircraft explains both its effectiveness and its limitations. The Ju-87 was designed in 1933 by Hermann Pohlmann at Junkers Flugzeug- und Motorenwerke. The first prototype flew on September 17, 1935. The Luftwaffe ordered the aircraft into production in 1936. By June 1941, when Rudel began flying combat missions, approximately 2,300 Ju-87s had been produced in various versions. The Ju-87B2, which Rudel flew in 1941-1942, had the following specifications: length 36 feet 5 inches, wingspan 45 feet 3 inches, height 13 feet 2 inches. Empty weight 6,080 pounds, maximum takeoff weight 9,700 pounds. The aircraft was powered by a single Junkers Jumo 211-day liquid-cooled inverted V12 engine producing 2,200 horsepower at 2,400 RPM, driving a 3-bladed variable pitch propeller. Maximum speed at 13,410 feet was 255 miles per hour. Cruising speed was 190 mph. Service ceiling was 26,150 feet. Combat range with full bomb load was 370 miles. Maximum ferry range was 620 miles. The crew consisted of 2: pilot in the forward cockpit, rear gunner radio operator in the rear cockpit, separated from the pilot by the fuselage fuel tank. Armament included 2 37mm Bordkanone BK 3,7 cannons mounted under the wings, later versions, or 2 7.92 MG-17 machine guns in the wings, earlier versions. 1 flexible 7.92 MG-15 machine gun in the rear cockpit operated by the gunner. Bomb load: 1 500 kilos or 1,000 kilos bomb on the centerline crutch, plus 250 kilos or 250 kilos bombs on wing racks. The Stuka's most distinctive feature was its fixed landing gear with streamlined spats covering the wheels. This created significant drag, reducing top speed by approximately 40-50 mph compared to retractable gear, but provided 3 critical advantages. First, simplified maintenance. No hydraulic systems, no mechanical complexity, nothing to fail. Crucial for operations on primitive forward airstrips, where maintenance facilities were minimal. Second, the fixed gear acted as a psychological weapon. The wheel spats mounted the Jericho trumpets, sirens that emitted a distinctive wailing sound during dives. The sound was intended to terrorize ground troops and became one of the Stuka's most recognizable characteristics. Third, the fixed gear provided a margin of safety during forced landings. Belly landings were impossible, but gear-down crash landings were more survivable. The dive brakes, large perforated panels on the wings, were revolutionary. When extended, they created massive drag that limited the Stuka's dive speed to approximately 350 kph, 217 mph, regardless of dive angle. This allowed pilots to dive at 80-90 degrees while maintaining precise control. The automatic pull-out system prevented blackouts during recovery. The pilot could set the pull-out altitude, typically 1,500 to 2,000 feet, and the system would automatically bring the aircraft out of the dive even if the pilot lost consciousness from G-forces. But by September 1941, the Stuka was already obsolete for operations where it faced modern fighter opposition. The aircraft was too slow to escape fighters, too weakly armed to fight them off, and too ungainly to maneuver defensively. Over Britain during the Battle of Britain in 1940, Stuka losses had been catastrophic, nearly 40% destroyed in 2 weeks. The Luftwaffe withdrew Stukas from the Western Front and concentrated them in the East, where Soviet fighter opposition was less effective. Even on the Eastern Front, Stukas required fighter escort for survival, but Rudel often flew without escort. His explanation: fighter pilots protect their charges by shooting down enemy fighters. I protect myself by staying low, flying fast between targets, and never establishing predictable patterns. Rudel's tank-killing tactics, which he developed in 1942-1943, revolutionized ground attack doctrine. Previous doctrine called for bombing tanks from medium altitude, 3,000-5,000 feet, using high explosive bombs. This approach achieved approximately 5 to 10% hit rates. Tanks were small, fast-moving targets that could hear aircraft approaching and take evasive action. Rudel developed a completely different approach. First, fly at ultra-low altitude, 50-100 feet, until within 2 miles of target. This prevented tanks from hearing the approach until too late. Second, climb rapidly to 800 to 1,000 feet directly behind the tank. This positioned the Stuka where tank crews had minimal visibility, directly astern in the blind spot. Third, dive at 70-80 degrees directly onto the tank's engine compartment. Tank armor was thinnest at the rear. Engine compartments were vulnerable. Fourth, use 37mm cannons rather than bombs. The Ju-87G, introduced in 1943, carried two Bord-Canone BK 3,7 cannons in underwing pods. These fired armor-piercing rounds capable of penetrating tank rear armor. Fifth, release cannon fire at 300-400 meters range, approximately 2 seconds before pullout. This gave 3 firing opportunities: the dive approach, the moment before pullout, and the climbing escape. Sixth, pull out at 150-200 feet, barely above the ground, and stay low during escape to minimize exposure to anti-aircraft fire. Using these tactics, Rudel achieved tank kill rates of 60 to 70%. On July 5, 1943, the first day of the Battle of Kursk, Rudel destroyed 12 Soviet tanks. Soviet tank commanders began recognizing Rudel's Stuka by its markings and would abandon their tanks when they saw him approaching. Intelligence reports indicated Soviet tank crews referred to Rudel as the Black Death because his aircraft had a distinctive black-painted engine cowling. Soviet High Command placed a bounty of 100,000 rubles on Rudel's head, the highest bounty placed on any single soldier during the war. Rudel was credited with destroying 519 tanks, 800-plus vehicles, 150-plus artillery positions, 4 armored trains, numerous bridges, 70 landing craft, 9 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat, 1 battleship, Marat, 2 cruisers, Petropavlovsk and another unconfirmed, and 1 destroyer, Minsk. He was shot down or forced to land 30 times due to anti-aircraft fire. He was wounded 5 times. The most serious wound occurred on February 8, 1945, and would have ended any other pilot's career. But for Rudel, it was just another obstacle to overcome through discipline and methodology. On February 8, 1945, Rudel was attacking Soviet artillery positions near the Oder River, approximately 50 miles east of Berlin. Germany was collapsing. Soviet forces were advancing on all fronts. The Luftwaffe was running out of fuel, ammunition, and aircraft. But Rudel continued flying 4 to 6 missions per day, attacking Soviet tanks and artillery to slow the advance. At 2:47 p.m., during his 5th mission of the day, Rudel's Stuka was hit by Soviet 37mm anti-aircraft fire. The shell struck his right foot, completely severing it and causing catastrophic damage to his lower leg. Blood sprayed throughout the cockpit. Rudel immediately went into shock. His rear gunner, Sergeant Ernst Gaterman, saw the blood and realized what had happened. Gaterman grabbed the radio and called for help. "Rudel is hit. Severe leg wound. He's losing consciousness. Need immediate medical support at landing." The nearest German airfield was Sagan, 40 miles northwest. Gaterman kept talking to Rudel, keeping him conscious. "Sir, stay awake. Focus on the instruments. Heading 310, altitude 1,500 feet. Just keep flying. Don't close your eyes." Rudel, bleeding massively, barely conscious, continued flying. His logbook entry for that mission, written by Gaterman, reads, "Mission 2-463, anti-aircraft hit, pilot wounded, emergency landing Sagan 1521. Doctors at the field hospital at Sagan amputated Rudel's right leg below the knee on February 9, 1945. The surgery saved his life. Gangrene would have killed him within 48 hours. Most pilots would have been medically retired. The Luftwaffe had regulations. Pilots with major amputations were automatically disqualified from combat flying. But Rudel refused to accept medical retirement. He argued that he could still operate rudder pedals with a prosthetic leg. Medical officers disagreed. The Luftwaffe's chief medical officer personally examined Rudel and declared him permanently unfit for flying. Rudel appealed directly to Field Marshal Robert Ritter von Greim, commander of Luftflotte 6. Von Greim approved Rudel's return to flying on a trial basis. Rudel was fitted with a crude prosthetic leg. a wooden shaft with leather straps and a rubber foot pad. By modern standards, it was primitive. No articulated ankle, no shock absorption, just a rigid peg that allowed weight-bearing and gross motor control. Rudel began rehabilitation immediately. Within 2 weeks, he was walking without crutches. Within 4 weeks, he was running short distances. Within 6 weeks, he was practicing aircraft controls using the prosthetic leg to operate rudder pedals. His physical therapist reported, "Rudel attacks rehabilitation the same way he attacks enemy tanks, methodically, relentlessly, without emotion or complaint." On April 9, 1945, exactly 2 months after losing his leg, Rudel flew a combat mission. His squadron commander, Major Ernst Siegfried Steen, the same Steen who'd led the attack on Marat in September 1941, tried to prevent him. "Hans, you can barely walk. You can't possibly fly combat missions. The regulations are clear. One-legged pilots are grounded." Rudel's response: "The regulations also say we should have air superiority, adequate fuel, and replacement aircraft. We have none of those things. The regulations don't apply anymore. All that matters is whether I can destroy Soviet tanks. I can destroy Soviet tanks. Therefore, I'm flying." Steen relented. Rudel climbed into his Stuka using his left leg and upper body strength, pulling himself into the cockpit with his arms. His prosthetic leg couldn't provide much assistance. Once in the cockpit, he strapped in, positioned his prosthetic leg on the right rudder pedal, and completed pre-flight checks. The takeoff was normal. Rudel's rudder control was slightly less precise than before, but functional. He flew to the front lines, identified a Soviet tank column, dove at 75 degrees, fired his 37mm cannons, and destroyed 2 tanks. He landed back at base 47 minutes after takeoff. His rear gunner, Gatorman, reported, "I couldn't tell any difference in his flying. The prosthetic leg didn't affect his performance." Between April 9th and May 8, 1945, a period of 29 days, Rudel flew 85 combat missions with his prosthetic leg. He destroyed 47 more tanks during those final weeks of the war, bringing his total to 519 tanks. His final mission occurred on May 8, 1945, the day Germany surrendered. He took off at 4:15 a.m., attacked Soviet artillery positions east of Prague, destroyed 2 Soviet trucks, and landed at 5:23 a.m. At 11 a.m., Germany's unconditional surrender went into effect. The war was over. Rudel immediately flew west and surrendered to American forces at Kitzingen rather than face Soviet capture. Given the 100,000 ruble bounty on his head and his destruction of 519 Soviet tanks, Soviet forces would have executed him immediately upon capture. American intelligence officers who interrogated Rudel were initially skeptical of his claimed achievements. One officer wrote in his report, "Subject claims 2,530 combat missions, 519 tanks destroyed, 1 battleship sunk. Claims appear exaggerated for propaganda purposes." But when American officers cross-referenced Rudel's claims with captured Luftwaffe records, they confirmed everything. The numbers were accurate. Rudel had indeed flown 2,530 missions. He had indeed destroyed 519 tanks. The American interrogation report concludes, "Subject's achievements, while seemingly incredible, are fully documented and verified. Subject represents the most effective ground attack pilot in any Air Force during the war. Recommend thorough study of subject's tactics and methodology for application to U.S. Air Force doctrine." Rudel was held as a prisoner of war until January 1946. After release, he emigrated to Argentina, where he lived from 1948 to 1953. He worked as a consultant for various governments and as an arms dealer. In 1953, he returned to Germany and became involved in far-right political movements. He published his memoir, Stuka Pilot, in 1952. The book was extremely controversial because Rudel expressed no regret about fighting for Nazi Germany and made statements supporting Nazi ideology. He associated with unrepentant Nazi figures, including helping Nazi war criminals escape to South America. He sheltered Josef Mengele, the Auschwitz doctor responsible for horrific medical experiments. Rudel's post-war political activities made him a pariah in mainstream German society, but a hero to neo-Nazi movements. Rudel received the Knight's Cross with golden oak leaves, swords, and diamonds, the only person ever awarded this decoration. It was created specifically for him because he'd achieved results that exceeded every existing award category. Adolf Hitler presented the medal personally on January 1, 1945, 4 months before Germany's defeat. At the ceremony, Hitler told Rudel, "You have achieved what entire divisions could not accomplish. You are worth more than a panzer division." Field Marshal Ferdinand Schörner said, "Rudel alone replaces an entire division." These weren't exaggerations. Soviet records confirm that Rudel's attacks disrupted Soviet operations repeatedly, destroyed critical equipment, and forced Soviet commanders to divert resources to defend against one pilot. After the war, Rudel's story became controversial. He surrendered to American forces in May 1945 and was held as a prisoner of war until 1946. After release, he emigrated to Argentina, where he lived until 1948. He worked as a consultant for various governments and military organizations. In the 1950s, Rudel became involved with far-right political movements in Germany. He published his memoir, Stuka Pilot, in 1952. The book was controversial because Rudel expressed no regret about fighting for Nazi Germany and made statements that many interpreted as continued support for Nazi ideology. His association with unrepentant Nazi figures and his political activities made him a divisive figure in post-war Germany. This creates a difficult ethical question for historians. Can we admire Rudel's flying skill, his discipline, his achievement as a pilot, while condemning his political beliefs and associations? Can we separate the pilot from the politics? There's no easy answer. What's clear is that Rudel was extraordinarily effective at a very specific task, precision ground attack flying. His methodology worked, his discipline produced results. His refusal to conform to pilot culture, the thing that initially got him mocked and dismissed, became his greatest strength. The lesson isn't political. The lesson is about effectiveness, methodology, and the danger of dismissing people who don't conform to established culture. Luftwaffe pilot culture in 1941 valued aggression, confidence, social bonding through drinking and partying, and a certain cavalier attitude toward danger. Rudel had none of those traits. He was methodical, cautious, solitary, and disciplined. His superiors and peers initially considered these traits disqualifying. They were wrong. Rudel's traits were exactly what was needed for the mission requirements he faced. Ground attack flying didn't reward flashy aggression. It rewarded patience, precision, and the ability to execute the same dangerous maneuver hundreds of times without making fatal mistakes. That's the story of Hans-Ulrich Rudel and September 23, 1941, when the old man, who didn't fit in, destroyed 3 Soviet warships in 90 minutes and proved that conforming to culture matters less than achieving results. That's the story of a pilot initially rejected from combat flying who became the most effective ground attack pilot in history by refusing to change who he was to fit in. That's the story of how discipline defeated flashiness, methodology defeated aggression, and precision defeated conformity. If stories like this make you think differently about fitting in and conforming to culture, hit that like button. Subscribe for more unlikely heroes who achieved extraordinary results by refusing to conform. Turn on notifications, drop a comment, and tell us where you're watching from and what you think about the ethics of studying Rudel's effectiveness while acknowledging his political beliefs. We read every comment. These conversations matter. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.